Welcome back to Velshine Rule. There is new reporting in the New York Times that a White House official told the whistleblower that President Trump's call with the president of Ukraine was, quote, crazy and frightening. According to the Times, the official said the call was completely lacking in substance related to national security, something the whistleblower recorded in a memo. The official was visibly shaken by what had transpired, according to this memo.
It also alleges that, quote, in the official's view, the president had clearly committed a criminal act by urging a foreign power to investigate a U.S. person for the purposes of advancing his own re-election bid in 2020. Joining us now, Joshua Geltzer, former senior director for counterterrorism at the National Security Council. Joshua, thanks for joining us. You have worked on the National Security Council. I guess I'm trying to figure out what spooks someone in that environment. What would cause someone to say, hey, this was way off of the norm?
I think a betrayal of public trust, an abuse of public office for private gain. If you see anyone doing that, but especially the president of the United States, that is crazy. That is frightening. And we don't need to take the whistleblower's word for it. We have all seen that call memorandum and the invitation to interfere in the U.S. elections that a U.S. president was extending. If I had heard about that or seen that, I too would have thought it was crazy and frightening.
The president thus far is brushing off these revelations, saying they're secondhand, they're false. But there is a pattern here emerging in what we're learning.
That's absolutely right. You know, when you're taught how to research in elementary school, you're taught maybe start with secondary sources, but get to the primary sources. Well, we've gotten to the primary sources here. We have read the call memorandum. We have seen the text messages that were exchanged among top U.S. diplomats working on this issue. And we can see that there was a deliberate push. The apparatus of the U.S. government was pushing Ukraine to dig up dirt on Trump's top political rival, Joe Biden. So we know that firsthand at this point, and it's concerning.
The New York Times has obtained some State Department emails that appear to downplay the issue of Ukrainian security funding. In this case, the $391 million is part of a larger piece of funding. One of the emails says, keep moving, people. Nothing to see here. It was sent by an acting deputy assistant secretary. What does this kind of keep things low key from the State Department tell you?
It suggests to me that there were people who at least touched this issue who knew something wrong was happening here. This was not just one bad day, one bad call by the U.S. president. Media reporting, what we've learned from testimony already and emails like that, is that that call was the culmination of weeks of preparation that had a lot of people worried. They were worried that the president might do exactly what he did, invite Ukraine to essentially mess with our elections, do something for his personal political gain. And it seems that a number of people, as they should have been, were uncomfortable along the way.
What's the danger of exposing the whistleblower? The president very clearly, or claims that he wants the identity of the whistleblower exposed, and Democrats are doing all they can to protect him or her.
You know, we have a system in which those who report what they believe to be serious wrongdoing through appropriate channels are to be protected. That's not just in their interest. That's in all of our interest. That is in the national security interest, because serious wrongdoing doesn't advance the interests of the United States, of our foreign policy, of our national security, of the American people. It advances some other interests. In fact, that's just what we're seeing happen here. So if we want people to come forward in appropriate ways, as this whistleblower by all accounts did, and say, I think something's gone awry here, we need to protect the people who do that.
Joshua Geltzer, thanks for joining us. He's the former senior director for counterterrorism at the National Security Council and the executive director of the Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection. Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.